1.
As you get stronger at citing evidence, another thing that you're going to want to learn how to use is an ellipsis. An ellipsis allows you to take multiple pieces of evidence and combine them together, or to omit or take away unnecessary parts of your evidence to only focus on what is most needed to prove your claim. So, for example, my claim I'm trying to prove is that throughout the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, Bod shows that he is perceptive. In order to really prove that he's perceptive, I might want to use lines for multiple places in the story. So I already showed you earlier that I thought this first line, he was surprised when he hit the floor, but he did not cry out. If you cried, they came and put you back in your crib. How I thought that shows he's perceptive. But in order to really help the reader and convince them that I see this character as perceptive and he truly is perceptive, I want to try to use additional evidence from a different part of the story to give stronger examples or additional examples of how truly perceptive he is. So, in order to do that, I want to combine two different parts of the text. So, I need to use this ellipsis, which is the dot, dot, dot you see here. That's called an ellipsis. What it is allowing me to do is to take evidence I found on page 7 and combine it with the evidence I found on page 26 and 27 here. So this is my second piece of evidence that I would be able to analyze and prove also shows how perceptive he is. So you'll see how I put Bod was no longer scared though, and here I'm citing dialogue, so I use a single quotation mark. I'm sorry I said they were imaginary, said Scarlet. I believe now. They're real. The Indigo Man raised something over his head. It looked like a sharp stone blade. All who invade this place will die, he shouted in his guttural speech. Bod thought about the man whose hair had turned white after he had discovered the chamber, how he would never return to the graveyard or speak of what he had seen. No, said Bod. I think you're right. I think this one is. Is what? Imaginary. So you can see here how I took an additional piece of evidence which will help connect to my claim. They're both going to show how perceptive he is, but I'm tying them together with the ellipsis and showing two different parts of the story that really go back to proving my claim. So that can be one way that you start to look at how you can include strong and thorough text evidence, which is how you score 4 on our evidence response rubric. Another way to have really strong evidence is to make sure you're being really selective with the evidence that you have. So another thing I'm going to show you is something that a lot of students have been doing is what you see here. Look at how much evidence is in this box. It's a lot. And it would be really intimidating for my reader to see all of that evidence at once and have to read all of this to understand how I'm proving my claim. So in this claim, I'm trying to prove how throughout the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, Bod demonstrates that he is benevolent even in the most frightening circumstances. So benevolent means that Bod is really kind, he's really nice. I found a place in the story, on one page of the story, that really shows how kind and benevolent he is. But I don't need all of this to prove how benevolent he is. I only need some of it. So in order to really focus on only the key parts, I can use an ellipsis in another way. I can use it to cut out the pieces I don't need. So you'll see here that I already started to brainstorm. I started to cross out lines in the text that aren't really necessary in proving my claim. And I left only the parts that I thought really show how benevolent or nice he is. So the way I'm going to cite this, you'll see here. So I started here. That's the best place for me to start. I put, I don't need light, said Bod. And notice how I put the 3 marks, 2 quotation marks here first show that I'm taking from the text. And then my single quotation mark shows I'm citing dialogue. And then here I use an ellipsis because I'm going to show that I'm taking away parts. I'm jumping from one place in the text to another place. Because if you look here, I decided I don't really need this line to help me prove how benevolent he is. It's not necessary. So I'm going to jump to where it says, I do, said Scarlet, it's dark. So I'm over here. Bod thought about the reassuring things that he could say, like, there's nothing bad down there. But the tales of hair turning white and people never returning meant that he could not have said them with a clear conscience. So he said, I'll go down. You wait for me up here. So this is another part that I'm using to show how benevolent he is. But I don't need the lines that come right after it, so I'm going to take them out. And I'm going to use an ellipsis to show I'm cutting out part of the text to only show what's necessary. So then I continue. If you held my hand and told me where I was walking, she said, then I could come with you if you make sure I'm okay. Of course, said Bod. So again, this is more evidence that's going to help prove he's benevolent, and I'm taking out all the pieces I don't need. And again, I'm going to use another ellipsis to cut out some of the parts I don't need and go right to the parts I do. He began to lead Scarlet down the steps, deep into the hill, and to describe what he saw to her as they went. So I could argue that each piece of this evidence I can explain in my analysis and tie to how benevolent he is. So I'm getting really strong text evidence and I'm cutting out the parts I don't need, which would take away from the relevance of my evidence and would confuse my reader. I'm only including the pieces that are really going to help my reader see how benevolent God is. So you can see here that the ellipsis can be used in a couple different ways. In both examples, I'm cutting out parts of the text that I don't need. In my first example, I was showing two different pages, so I cut out a lot of text. So I showed how I used two different lines from different page numbers. In this example, I showed how I only included the most necessary evidence and I got it all from one page, but I omitted the parts that weren't really essential to my claim. So that's another way that you can really improve your evidence and make it stronger and more thorough and start to exceed by using the ellipsis correctly. Notice that when I used the ellipsis, I didn't use any spaces in between. I connected one line from the text and then I immediately, without any extra spaces, went into the next line of the text. Just be careful that you do the same when you use your ellipsis.